Bonjour, on va recommencer maintenant avec la séance 3, l'évaluation des initiatives contre la violence. On va commencer avec ma collègue Monica Ruiz Casares de la division de psychiatrie sociale et transculturelle de l'Université de McGill. Monica est une professeure adjointe à McGill. Elle est aussi également conseillère scientifique au Centre de santé et des sciences sociales de la montagne à Montréal, où elle évalue les programmes sociaux et de santé auprès de familles de diverses origines ethnoculturelles. Elle a publié beaucoup de choses et va discuter le sujet de prévention de la violence en milieu scolaire, comment savoir si nous faisons une différence. Merci.
Merci Tara et Mona de m'avoir invité à présenter ici aujourd'hui. Ce que vous me voyez, j'ai l'impression que je me cache, même si Claire était très généreuse de partager son ordinateur avec moi, qui est plus petite que les miennes, pour que moi, vous pouvez me voir les yeux là. Je fais justement le contraire, j'ai mis les diapos en français, je vais faire la présentation en anglais, mais bon, j'espère qu'on va s'entendre. We've been talking, school violence is increasingly a topic of public concern and research attention. Many programs and initiatives are implemented. Oftentimes, or very often, they're not evaluated or systematically monitored and evaluated. I should probably do, as we do in the continuing medical education courses, start with a disclaimer saying I don't have any conflicts of interest. But, and I've worked in evaluation for 18 years, but not specifically in terms of school contexts. So I will count on the other panelists and also Francois to maybe share some of the specific findings. And instead what I will do is I will help us think, hold on, I have to handle this one and that one. Okay, now we're going. What we'll do is first, a quick introduction, rationale, what is evaluation, why do we do it, and how can we frame it within the Convention on the Rights of the Child. Then some key features of evaluation, kind of not a checklist, but some of the ingredients that we should be thinking of, either to conduct them or to commission them or to consume them, like read them. Touch on some of the ethical issues which are unavoidable in any research or evaluation dealing with human beings, and then some conclusions. Okay, so even the experts in evaluation and the theorists, Michael Scriven, Michael Patton, David Fetterman, they don't agree quite on one definition of evaluation. So I picked one that is the one that is used by the Government of Canada, which is, I think, broad enough to encompass a number of interventions. And for those of you who are not used to doing evaluation, I think should help, which is the systematic collection and analysis of evidence on the outcomes of programs to make judgments about the relevance, performance, and alternative ways to deliver or to achieve the same results. So basically, compared to other knowledge-generating activities, there are three ingredients. One is the object. Evaluation tackles practical issues, concrete practical issues that will help make decisions, whether it's policymakers or decision program managers. The second element is the approach or methods. So evaluation uses a number of methods, a number from different disciplines, different perspectives, and I think I missed one of my presentations here. And the third element is the outcome. So evaluation generally tries to produce results that are credible, that are valid, that are reliable, and that are objective. Big challenges that we have, particularly when we also want to take into account the context, which is something that has come up a number of times in the presentations earlier. So why do we evaluate? There are a number of reasons. They're not mutually exclusive, and I was trying to summarize it and come up with some framework. I summarized it in five reasons. One is accountability, and that's probably what is going to lead most of my presentation. basically evaluation provides some evidence or measure of program performance and monitors expenditures. The second role that evaluation can play is in decision making. So it can help us make better decisions about the direction of a program or the priorities of the program or the allocation of resources. The third element, and here is something that I hope will stay with you, and it's that, and it's been said before, the importance of designing interventions based on evidence. So to take into account what we already know that works and what we already know that doesn't work as we are moving forward. Doesn't mean that we just replicate it. There's a lot of work that needs to be done to see whether the findings that we have are contextually appropriate. A lot of the work we do at the Citoyens de la Montagne, because we work a lot with refugees and immigrants, is a lot of literature reviews and innovative practices, because a lot of the existing evidence hasn't been tested with ethnocultural communities. So we have often this challenge of, we know what this works somewhere else, but does it work with my population here and now? That's a challenge we have, but evaluation can help us in that process. Evaluation can also help with learning. Learning can help managers better understand their programs, the needs that they're responding to, and the good practices that are emerging from their work. Evaluation can also serve for social change. It can help promote, defend, or oppose certain methods, certain approaches, can shape public opinion, can build in more pluralism and democracy, maybe in decision-making within a program. And finally, evaluation can help with cooperation and cohesion by increasing maybe communications or certain practices in between units or departments or institutions, or even strengthen the enthusiasm and the dynamism in a team that is involved in evaluation. Okay, so there are many models. I thought I'd step outside of the evaluation literature and use this graph that comes from the context of design, of product design, which was kind of thinking out the box, but it's still reminding us of this, the needs to have successive cycles of exploration, creation, and evaluation if we want to find creative solutions to the social problems we have. So in this case, this was to explain how they develop products, but I think social programs can be seen in a way as a product that go through this cycle in which we assess whether, what are our needs, and if we really don't get them met, then we keep exploring until, so that's the cycle of exploring, creating, and evaluating. And to that, I added the 4 guiding principles of the CRC, because I think that the Convention of the Rights of the Child and child right-based approaches help frame evaluation nicely. They can not only, frame evaluation, but I think that particularly the right to participation and the right to protection will come up later as I talk about ethical issues. They're unavoidable when do research and evaluation in schools. So I wanted to, bring them to the fore from the beginning. All right, so what are some of the key features of an evaluation? First of all, we need to know what we're talking about. And so there's been questioning about whether what bullying is a good word or not, whether I'm not going to go there. I'm just going to make sure that we know what we're talking about before we move forward, move to measure it. So there's an overlap area between bullying and aggressive behavior, but it's not exactly the same thing. So before we go into evaluating the program or designing it first, but I'm just talking about evaluation, let's make sure, the first question is, let's make sure that we all know what we're talking about. Then the next step, or the first step, is to come up with evaluation questions. So, and these, I think we have to respond first to the needs of decision makers. So I go back to some of the uses that I said earlier. So what is the information that decision makers, and I'm leaving it broad, it might be the teacher in some cases, in other cases might be the principal, in some cases might be a group of students who want to know how to improve their relationships with their peers. So let's figure out what is the question that we need answers for so that we can make the appropriate decisions. And very broadly, there are 2 types of questions in evaluation, the process questions and the results focused questions. And again, this is oversimplifying. So for other professional evaluators in the room, you know, I'm very aware of that, but it's a good starting point. So either we're asking how well are we implementing this program, or we're asking, did it work? That's basically what I'm talking about. So in this presentation, for the sake of time, because Tara has already warned me that she's going to be really tight, I'm not going to focus on process, although they're essential. And oftentimes in the evaluations I do, which are often complex as the world we live in, and mixed methods and whatnot, the results and the processes go, you know, together. So it's not that easy to separate them. But, you know, I had to try, il faut trancher somewhere, and here I'm going to focus on effectiveness. So, you know, did the students who participated see a change in behavior or not? Were there any unintended consequences, positive or negative? What do the parents of the children report that you know, that the children gained from the program, and so forth? So effectiveness. And the reason why identifying the question from the beginning, I mean, the evaluation questions are the core of the whole evaluation process, but it's because different questions require different designs and different methodologies. And that is the one message, if you can only remember one thing from today, besides the fact that she was very short and you could barely see her, is just keep this idea. We need to know what is our question, and then depending on that, the design comes. There are big debates among evaluators in terms of, you know, what is an impact evaluation or what not, and what is best to do a randomized control trial. I mean, the Faculty of Medicine, we have these discussions all the time, and whether we're ready to retire the RCT or we'll go for, you know, the non-experimental approach. And I'm going to take the middle route, maybe because I'm a middle child, and I think there's always space for dialogue. So we have the questions for evaluation, and the selection of the design should be seen as a process of aligning the repertoire of possible designs and the particular attributes of the program or intervention within the context of the spirit of the school, of the different educational theories, which is beyond my background, and I'll leave it for the specialist in education. But it's something that needs to be taken into account. What is the approach of the school? What is aligned with their way of working, the way of communicating with parents and with students? So just throwing out ideas to make it a bit complicated, and to show that evaluation is, at least for effectiveness, is not method specific, or at least from my perspective, is not method specific or design specific. Each one has strengths and weaknesses, and it depends on the question you need to answer. Okay, still, I'm going to go for the very basic traditional approach of how you classify types of designs. What types of designs are there? And I'm using Bill Trochin's description because I think it's simple. You ask yourself two questions and you basically cut the three pieces. So the first one is there a random allocation into groups? And here I'm talking about random allocation and not selection. And if there's confusion about that, we'll take it later. It's very important. So basically, are you deciding who's participating in the program and who is not participating in the program in a way that is by chance? If yes, then you have a randomized experiment. You've probably heard randomized evaluation, randomized control trial, randomized trial, many different ways. If no, then you ask yourself the second question, which is, do we have a control group? Or are we administering different waves of measurements? If yes, then you might have a quasi-experimental design, and this is a term you've probably heard before. So now we have demystified it. It's very simple. It gets complicated, but we're not gonna go there today. Or it's a non-experiment. And a non-experiment, it sounds kind of, oh, that's nothing. It's actually the most usual way we measure our activities is by applying one test at the end of the intervention, and that is, well, we call it non-experiment, but it's actually very useful in many occasions, and sometimes it's the only feasible thing, so you just have to go for it. So what are some of the kind of in the checklist of things that one has to think about when you're designing your evaluation or when you're reading a paper about an evaluation? Okay, things that you need to pay attention to. Number one is number one, we looked at design, right? I mean, the evaluation question and then design very quickly. I'll go back to design now. But then what is the sample? Who's participating? Who's in the program? It might be students, it might be the teachers, it might be students and teachers, it might be other personnel from the school, it might be the parents. Then what are the characteristics of the experimental, like the group that is getting the intervention, the program, and the group that is not getting anything, if we have a control group? What is the size of that group? What are the characteristics in terms of gender, in terms of ethnocultural composition? We've talked before about different levels of prevention. So are these children, are we engaging with children who are already engaging and exhibiting some aggressive behavior, or are they at risk of, or is just the general population? I'm trying to go, okay. Then the type of intervention, is the intervention a single intervention, or is it at multiple levels? For example, maybe it's a curriculum that goes together with mentoring and also with teacher training, or is it only one of them? And the different levels of intervention, are we working at the classroom level? Are we talking at the whole school that is involved? Is the community of parents involved as well? So, okay, we're getting to, I don't know if I'm going fast or slow, but I'm just, okay, good. So another key feature, outcomes, of course. So those are the expected results of our program, is the reason why we do it. Those are the changes we want to make in the world. So here are some of the most common direct and indirect outcomes, or primary, secondary outcomes. Again, with all we've heard, particularly in the previous panel, this is very simple and seems decontextualized, because there's some of the key outcomes there. It might be that we're trying to improve relationships, and that's actually the ultimate outcome that we have. So, but generally, if you look at the evaluations that have been done, the focus on reducing particular types of bullying, or reducing violence, or particular types of problematic, aggressive, or disruptive behavior tend to be the more important outcomes. To measure those outcomes, we can do it with different instruments. Those can be in way qualitative or quantitative. We can, oftentimes what is used are teacher ratings or reports, as well as children voices, of course, and I go back to the idea of child participation. You need to oftentimes get self-reports. It might be through a questionnaire or through an interview, and oftentimes we use nominations like peer ratings. Children will be asked who else in the class is either bullying them or victimizing them or not. Okay, and the effects in quantitative studies are generally reported in terms of prevalence and mean scores and standard deviations. Well, things you might encounter when you read the literature or not, but at least in quantitative terms, how are we measuring if we're seeing a change or not. And then sometimes there are analysis by subgroups. So does it make a difference for girls or for boys? Does it make a difference for a particular age group or a particular ethnocultural group? Although my understanding is that there are few programs that are targeted for these particular ethnocultural groups, for instance. Okay. So I'm going to pass this, which was the graphic representation of what I just explained. And these are some examples, but I think I'm going to let David and Tina later talk about specific evaluations that have been done of interventions. Okay. All right. So there are a number of cases in which the randomized experiment, which often is seen as the golden standard, is not appropriate, because it's very good to answer the question of did it work, but not how can we prove it, or would it work in this other setting, right? So there are other approaches, and I chose an example that actually, I don't know if Michael has left, but shared with me, of the Respect Me program, an evaluation in Scotland, which I think is a good example of a qualitative approach. What they did, let me see, is evaluation in 2 phases, and they prioritize group and individual interviews and also case studies, which is a very different approach from what I just cleansed through the surface of. Okay, let me quickly mention. All right, so in every evaluation or research that involves human beings, there are a number of dilemmas and ethical dilemmas. And even if you try to anticipate them all, chances are, that happens to me because I work a lot in low-income countries, it happens here as well, but there you just have to let go of all your planning because life happens. You have to be ready to anticipate some of those enjeux. And in many cases, you cannot anticipate them. You have to be well-equipped to just react on the moment. And so the principles, the three principles that stem from the Belmont report, but we could go to our Tri-Council policy kind of at home, the principle of respect for persons and autonomy and beneficence and justice, of making sure that participation is well-informed, that before any child or anyone participates in our evaluation knows what they're getting into, what are the risks and the benefits, that we don't overprotect children in a way that we keep them out of research. So they have to know in a way that they can understand what might be the risks of participating, but also what can they get out of it. Okay, and then understanding that there are different comprehensions of what ethics means in different ethnocultural contexts. Randomization has its own ethical dilemmas it brings with it. When you do experiments, like randomized experiments, the principle of equipoise is particularly important. You have to know that if there's strong evidence that a program works or that a program doesn't work, then you cannot ethically do a randomized experiment. So you have to, be very aware of the level of uncertainty that the experts in the field have, in a way that if you know that something works, think of you, that if we had a drug, I'm going into the medical field, but it's really a good example. But imagine it's a program to prevent violence. If you really know it works and you're going to offer it to some children in the school, then you really have to have good reasons. And oftentimes it's lack of resources, which I don't know if it's a good reason, but to justify that you're only giving it to some children in the school and not to the rest. So just engaging with these dilemmas, or of course, if there's a strong evidence that it doesn't work, then you don't want to push it forth in your school. Okay, so let me wrap up with basic takeaway messages. First, of course, consider the importance and the purpose of each evaluation question. Second, there are designs that the design should match the evaluation question and also the attributes of your environment. And there's no standard textbook solution that works for every context. It's been said before. You have to tailor it to your particular context. Let me pass because I think trudging again is too much here. Okay. There are a range of potential designs. You have to let go of perfection. And I'm saying this, and I should be hearing it myself. Sometimes you just have to live with what is feasible and understand there are always trades-off. And there was a comment before said in these lines, no design, Francois said it before, no design will fit all the purposes. And you have to try to get as much scientific rigor and credible results that are practical, but knowing that oftentimes there are trade-offs in the process. Many of these designs require high skills in evaluation and high cost. And that is a very practical reason and very valid to take into account when you're finalizing your design. Combining different methods can strengthen your causal inferences, and it's often advised. And particularly these days, mixed methods are commonplace. So I'll finish with one summary idea. I had this moment of enlightenment. Well, you tell me if it was enlightenment. But I thought it was a good way to condense how I felt about this, and is that violence is a human rights issue. It's a human rights violation. It's a public health problem. Maybe I should add it's an education problem, since we are in this school context, and has huge costs for individuals and for society. And so the role of evaluation is to be a tool to provide us the information that we need to know whether we're moving in the right direction to combat it or not. Or that's how I see it. On time. Okay. Thank you.
OK, merci beaucoup, Monica. On va continuer avec Tina Daniels. Et je vais m'excuser pour mes erreurs en français. J'ai essayé. J'excuse. Tina Daniels est psychologue du développement et professeure en psychologie à l'Université Carleton à Ottawa. Ses intérêts de recherche comprennent l'étude de l'intimidation et de l'agression sociale. Elle va discuter le sujet de l'agression sociale, programme d'intervention prometteur et questions toujours sans réponse. Merci.
It's very nice to be here today. I was smiling to myself when I arrived this morning. In the mid-1980s, I completed my clinical internship in the building that used to be in this spot. And at that time, it housed a residential treatment center for highly aggressive, about 99% physically aggressive boys. And so that's where I started my career, working with highly aggressive boys. It wasn't until about 10 years later that we started to think about what we refer to as social or relational aggression, and what is sometimes referred to, especially in the media, as, quote, girls aggression, and I'll talk about that a little bit. So one of the things I want to start first with saying is thank you for setting it up and saying we have to give away our need for perfectionism. What I'm going to show you today is what we have available to us. It is not perfect, and it is not necessarily very pretty, but what I am going to try and do is pull out some generalized abilities across the evidence base we currently have for intervention programs designed to address social or relational aggression. We do have a mandate in the province at this point in time to have anti-bullying programs in every school in the province, but we have not done a really good job at looking at providing strong evidence-based programs to implement. So I'm going to look specifically at programs designed for social and relational aggression, and then David's going to follow up by looking at more general anti-bullying programs. Before we go on, though, I want to tell you what I mean when I talk about social aggression or relational aggression. These were terms that were introduced in the mid-1990s, which referred to behaviors that are intended to cause harm by damaging another's self-esteem or their social status. Social aggression tends to be considered a broader construct. It includes spreading rumors, malicious gossip, social exclusion, nonverbal body language, eye-rolling, hair flip. Relational aggression is considered a little bit narrower construct that falls under the rubric of social aggression, and it's behaviors that are intended to harm others' relationships or their self-esteem, typically expressed within friendship or social groups. So when I use the term social aggression, I'll be talking more broadly. You'll hear me use the term relational aggression more frequently because there's a larger body of research in that area. There are stronger measures in that area, and that's predominantly the area that I've worked in. I think that Rachel Simmons in her book Odd Girl Out typifies social aggression very well when she says the lifeblood of relational aggression is the relationship. And we've talked a lot today about how we've moved in our conceptions and understanding of bullying from being two kids in the back corner of a field someplace duking it out to seeing, as Deb pointed out, that bullying is a relationship issue requiring relationship solutions. Most relational aggression occurs within intimate social or friendship networks, and the closer the target is to the perpetrator, the more cutting the loss. And we have a quote here from a grade 8 girl who says, "Your friends know you and how to hurt you, and they know what your weaknesses are, and they know exactly what to do to destroy someone's self-worth, and they try to destroy you from the inside." This is a quote from a girl that was in a group that I worked with a number of years ago. She says, "My so-called best friend always did and still does betray me constantly." And I think as adults, we find that an oxymoron. It's not at all uncommon for elementary girls to have those kind of feelings regarding their close relationships. And as Deb has pointed out, our relationship history follows us for the rest of our lives. So these are particularly problematic and worrisome relationships. Now, as I mentioned, relational or social aggression has often been referred to in the literature or in the media, especially as, quote, girls' aggression. And there's been a lot of research and a lot of discussion about that. And certainly for a number of years, Nikki Crick in particular in Minnesota demonstrated it through her research that girls tended to use relational aggression more than boys. Strangely, however, in Ottawa, in the number of through 3 large samples that I've conducted, I've found no differences between boys and girls in their use of relational aggression, as have other people around the country and around the world. And in fact, more recent meta-analyses by Card and Archer have really shown that there are many fewer differences in relational aggression between boys and girls than have previously been thought. In terms of their actual experiences, we've been doing interviews with boys and girls about conflict within their close friendship groups, and we find that relational aggression occurs frequently in boys and that their experiences seem similar. However, there is lots of argument in the literature that girls are reported to be more distressed by relational aggression than boys, and that the impact may be more harmful for girls than for boys. And I would say that's written about in the literature quite a bit, but there's not a lot of strong evidence to support that. Other people, like Stephen Leff, have argued that school-based interventions may be appropriate for both boys and girls. So I'm going to show you some interventions that have been designed specifically for girls who are in social aggression, and then some that are more generally designed to be completed by both boys and girls. But before we go on, I just want to highlight why we should be concerned about social aggression. It appears that when we look at both social and physical aggression, boys and girls are equally victimized. About 8% report being relationally victimized, 9% report being physically victimized, and about 9% report being both. Relational aggression does tend to be moderately stable over time, and it has been identified as being related to internalizing problems, academic deficits, student-teacher conflicts, lack of school engagement, and later mental health problems. Also, if we look particularly at girls, research has shown that 7th grade girls, 1/3 of their conflicts with girls involve friendship manipulations. And in my own research in middle school, we've shown that about 7% of girls report being highly relationally victimized by their very best friend. So that suggests to me a need for intervention. I'm sorry, I didn't check the time before I started. Can I just get a time check?
Yeah, you are now just 6 minutes.
Perfect. Okay, thank you. If we just get a feel for what relational or social aggression is like, if you haven't heard about this construct before, purposefully excluding someone. When I'm mad at someone, I get even by making sure that no one else in my group plays with that person. You can see the manipulation of the relationship. Withdrawing friendships in order to hurt or control others. When my friends and I don't like someone, we won't let them play with us. Turning members of the peer group against a particular person. If I'm mad at someone, I make sure that everyone knows and I tell everyone else not to like her too. Spreading rumors. When one of us hears a rumor about someone we don't like, we tell each other and pass it on. And the use of negative facial expressions and the body language. And certainly I know I have 2 younger sisters. The dinner table conversation at my house when I was young went something like this. Mom, make Tina stop looking at me. Make her stop looking at me. I'd say, I'm not doing anything. I'm just sitting here. But I was doing something. I was being highly relationally aggressive to my sister by making faces at her when my mother wasn't looking. I sat in a graduate class where the male professor was smoking a cigarette, and he said that since there's no such thing as aggression in girls, we would be studying aggression for the rest of the term. And I was quite taken aback because I thought, well, I have sisters and there certainly is aggression. But that was when we thought mostly about physical aggression. This is a quote from a 15-year-old girl. I remember that day that T was like walking around crying or something because nobody liked her. And another group of girls came up to us and said, don't, whatever you do. T is trying to get into your group. Don't let her in because she's spreading rumors about us and everything. The last group she was in was our group. So you can see the dynamic of the social relationships. And when we start to think about interventions, we have to think about how to address those dynamics. Been a lot of research about social motivations for the use of social and relational aggression. I've certainly conducted a lot of research in that area with Danielle Quigley. And there are a lot of payoffs for being highly socially aggressive. Being socially aggressive builds group cohesion, a sense of belonging, builds group alliance and loyalty, and a sense of identity. It provides popularity and status among your peers. It allows you to be high profile within the group and to feel powerful and in control. It provides a way to address feelings of jealousy and revenge, all while allowing girls to look nice. And certainly there's been lots written in the literature about the tyranny of niceness. Lynn McHale-Brown talks about how girls are very socialized in our culture to, quote, look nice. Although girls I talk to will tell me we don't have to be nice, you just have to look nice. And that's some of why aggression may go underground for some individuals. In the research that I've done on girls' motivations, we found that girls who say they would use high levels of social aggression are interested in achieving feelings of power, revenge, and control while simultaneously keeping themselves out of trouble and maintaining a relationship with the rest of the peer group. And it is quite a successful strategy for achieving those things. So that leads us to the challenge for intervention. Can we bring privilege, power, and status to them in ways that are not at the expense of other people? Because if they're getting their needs met, and these are some normal developmental needs that are being met at the expense of others, if we're not successful in meeting those needs, it's highly unlikely that they'll cease to use those behaviors. There's strong evidence from a variety of areas that adolescents admire aggressive peers and provide a lot of accolades and positive regard for them. And if individuals believe that others are accepting of their behavior, they're unlikely to cease in its use. Many of the programs that I'm going to talk about today and that are being advocated in the bullying area right now are focused on bystander engagement for that very reason, because it appears that the social milieu can very much support aggressive behaviors and bullying behaviors. So first I wanted to present a review of what we know about relationally aggressive programs that have been designed specifically for groups of girls. So we're going to look at interventions that targeted girls specifically and that were focused only on social aggression. And there are 5 published programs in the field, so not very many. There's the social aggression prevention program. There's the Clubophilia. There's the friend-to-friend program, the psychoeducational group for aggressive adolescents, and the Girls United program. So they are, oh, sorry, I didn't move the slide. There we go. So if we look at these programs that are specifically designed for girls, we might ask, what kinds of effects do these programs have? Clubophilia is a program that is focused around camp. It has a lot of art activities, modeling, role-playing, focused around reducing social aggression. This is the Girls United program that Danielle Quigley and I developed for Girl Guides of Canada, which is a primary prevention program designed to provide girls with skills and Girl Guide leaders with these skills to control the group dynamic in ways that don't support bullying behavior. So this is a look at these 5 programs, and I've broken my glasses just at the moment when I need them most. But anyways, I did blow this up, so we should be okay. So if you can see that the social aggression prevention program targets all girls. It's middle grades, grade 4, 5, 6. On average, 10 sessions, about 40 minutes each. Clubophilia is a program that is specifically for girls who are socially aggressive, who have been referred by teachers or have elected themselves to be in the program. Again, in middle school, about 12 sessions. The friend-to-friend program was designed specifically for socially aggressive girls, but they argue that it's also extremely important that they have positive role models in the group. Again, grades 3, 4, 5, middle elementary school. All girl groups for all of these programs. The psychoeducational program was designed for socially aggressive girls in residential care in middle school. And the Girls United program is a little bit different in that it's designed for all girls. There are peer mentors for 3 of the programs: Clubophilia, Friend to Friend, and Girls United. And we'll just look at the results of the evaluation. You can see that The social aggression program used teacher report data. They did have a control group. The subjects were volunteers, and they did find success in reducing social aggression for those children who were in the highly socially aggressive subgroup, and an improvement in social problem solving for all the members of the group. Clubophilia, which had self-report data, no control group, and had referred girls in it, showed no significant differences in social aggression before and after the program, although they report that the change was in the expected direction, but it was not big enough to be considered significant. The friend-to-friend program, which had both teacher and self-report data and a control group, and consisted of volunteer girls who participated, showed large decreases in relational aggression, declines in hostile attributions, declines in loneliness. However, this program is specifically designed for African American highly aggressive girls, so it is quite specific. And the psychoeducational program, which had self-report data, no control, and referred girls, showed significantly fewer antisocial beliefs, but they didn't measure behavior. Thank you. So it's a very small sample. You can see that we're getting some effects. So out of the 4 programs here, and the Girls United program has not been evaluated with girls yet. We've evaluated Girl Guide leaders, but not girls. We have 2 programs that have been successful in reducing relational aggression, and 2 that have not. In terms of making recommendations for best practices based on those 5 programs together, we made 7 key recommendations that you might want to consider if you're thinking about implementing an anti-bullying program specifically geared towards social aggression. A lot of controversy about whether it should be a single gender intervention or mixed gender. My feeling from what I've seen in the literature is that in order for girls to feel comfortable in talking about their experiences, they don't want boys present. So that's not to say that boys might also benefit from programming, but it may be that girls and boys may benefit most from separate programming. I do believe that early intervention is ideal, and specifically at grades 4 and 5, which seems to be the area when girls and boys are starting to have experiences with social aggression. They're interested in talking about their experiences, and they are not very entrenched in the behavior. Once they get into grades 7 and 8, they can become very entrenched, and it's very hard to change those behaviors. I really believe these programs should be for all youth, not just highly socially aggressive youth. And certainly the people who ran these programs, the ones that were specifically geared for highly socially aggressive girls, they argued that they needed positive role models in the group as well. And so that's another important aspect. Program should be a minimum of 10 weeks, meeting at least once a week. And there's been an interesting study where they gave the exact same information to youth over a 2-day weekend, kind of blitz program versus once a week for 10 weeks. And the once a week for 10 weeks got significantly better outcome. So it appears that youth need time to digest the material provided. Peer mentors appear to play a critical role in reducing social aggression, and 3 of the programs used mentors and reported good success. Focus on awareness as a first step. Promoting awareness was argued by all the researchers to be an important first step. And then we need to build skills that are incompatible with the use of social aggression. And here's just a short list, and I saw a list earlier in of 7 strategies that I thought would be really good things to focus on, but I'm saying here skills that are incompatible with social aggression include acceptance of diversity, empathy, fostering inclusiveness, finding commonalities, and creating a circle of caring. And I can talk more about those later if you're interested. Stephen Leff and Nikki Crick in 2010 conducted a general review across the literature on programs that included some aspect of relational aggression within a broader program. So these are not specifically programs with focused on social relational aggression, but they include a component. Out of 138 articles, they found 22 that described 21 interventions, and out of those 21 interventions, they found 8 that they felt were valid and met the inclusion criterion of being school-based, having a detailed description of the program, having random assignment or a control group, and having generalizability of results where there was a clear description of the sample. Some of those programs are programs that have been around for a while, like I Can Problem Solve and Second Step, who have recently added a relational aggression component, and some of them are newer programs like Kiva and WITS. So I'm just going to quickly, the ones with the stars have been successful in reducing relational aggression or relational victimization. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So we have the largest majority have been successful in reducing some aspect of relational aggression. So most of these programs have demonstrated some reduction, and a few have shown in aggression, and a few have shown a reduction in victimization. Recommendations: choose programs that are developmentally appropriate, develop champions within the school, such as the WITS program, and include multi-component socio-ecological approaches that include parents and teachers and school personnel. Recognize the importance of program accessibility and the implementation fidelity. That's one of the things that's not really being evaluated right now, is how well the program is being implemented and whether it's being implemented over time. Biggest barrier to interventions right now are time and teachers' ability to implement them into their regular day. And also focusing on participatory action projects where there's an interaction between the school and the people implementing the program to design a program specifically for their needs, and community-university partnerships. So I'm down to the end here. What do we still need answers to? And there's a long list. Are the program's effects being maintained over time? Very little longitudinal data has been collected so far. We've just finished, David Smith and I with Bonnie Leadbeater have just finished a 2.5-year longitudinal randomized control study of the WITS program. It's one of the few I know that has longitudinal data and randomized control. Who should the target for the program be? Should it be general? Should it be specific? Should it be for girls? Should it be for different cultures? Is there a developmental period that's critical? Is the program for relational and physical victimization together, is that sufficient, or do we need specialized programming for relational aggression? Is fidelity important to impact? Do we need to measure it? Should we be measuring it? How many sessions are necessary to be effective? Big important question that's being talked about in the literature a lot right now, is cyberbullying just an extension of social aggression, or does it need a separate approach totally? I would argue, as my students will tell you, that I don't think that cyberbullying is a form of bullying. I think it's a modality. I think it is social aggression on the internet. Is the school the only and most suitable place to address these issues? And are rural and urban settings the same? So lots of challenges. And I'll just say we are making progress, but we have a ways to go. I think that schools cannot mandate friendships, but they can ensure that all students feel included as members of the school community. I always say you don't have to be friends with everyone, but it's not okay to be hurtful or harmful to anyone. And our objective should be to ensure that all students develop the skills necessary for healthy social relationships in later life, being respectful to others regardless of differences. Thank you.
Thank you, Tina. Merci beaucoup, Tina. C'était fantastique. Et maintenant, on a David Smith. David Smith est professeur de counseling à la faculté d'éducation ici de l'Université d'Ottawa. Ses principaux intérêts de recherche sont axés sur les programmes scolaires de prévention de l'intimidation. Et puis, elle va discuter aujourd'hui la prévention de l'intimidation, état des connaissances et défis futurs. Merci.
Merci beaucoup, Tara. Bon après-midi, tout le monde. I'm going to take this off. Can I do that? Yeah. Can I take this off? I can take that off. There we go. I'm doing it by hand because I don't have a monitor up here. And I'm going to have to stand looking at the screen because if I don't, I'll have nothing to say and it'll feel like a long 20 minutes for all of us in the room. There we go. Okay, thank you. Yes. Okay. Instructions not to move too much up here. Okay. Yes, I'm going to talk about bullying prevention in a general sense. There are themes that were brought up in both of the previous presentations by Monica and Tina that are going to be reflected here. You'll see some trends in the bullying prevention findings generally. And it kind of boils down to we still have an awful lot to learn and to know about how we do this right. So as I presume I'm not speaking to an audience of bullying prevention researchers, I thought the best thing to do was kind of orient you to where we're at now in 2014 with respect to bullying prevention. And as Tina mentioned in her presentation, here in Ontario and Quebec and many other provinces in Canada, bullying prevention programs are required by law. So there's a lot going on out there in the field, on the ground in schools. And this is a really important issue for policy and for practice. And you'll see, as was foreshadowed in Tina's presentation, research lags a little bit behind, or quite a bit, practice and policy in this respect. I'm not sure if Deb Pepler showed this. Deb, did you show this slide? No. This is from the Public Health Agency of Canada's survey of health behaviors of school-aged children, Deb Pepler being one of the investigators on that. And there's a section on bullying, and this is to give you a snapshot of bullying in Canada. This is a very, based on a very large sample. In the most recent version of that survey, there was 21,000 Canadian youth, grades 6, 8, and 10, who participated in that, so it's huge by research standards. And it gives us a picture of bullying among Canadian youth. And we've been collecting these data in Canada now for 8 years and 3 iterations of the surveys. And so the bars here represent the survey results from 2002, 2006, and 2010. And the numbers represent the accumulation of responses to the questions that separate the kids who claim to have been involved in bullying in the last 2 months or not. Okay, so those columns total those, and they're separated into the different groups of respondents. So first of all, some kids say they're not involved at all. And then there are kids who say, yes, I've been a victim of bullying, and they're in the first block there. The second block are the kids who say that they have bullied other children. The third block of columns are kids that fall into both of those categories simultaneously. So they say, yes, I've been victimized, and I've also bullied other children. And the last block there are simply the total of those 3, because these are mutually exclusive groups, and they total up to those numbers. So starting just to highlight a few points of this graph. First of all, if we looked at the block where the total numbers are, we see that roughly 3/4 of children and youth in Canada in those grades are saying that they're involved in bullying, either being victimized, bullying others, or in both roles. So that's a lot of kids, 3/4 of our kids. If we were to include the kids who witness bullying, and we're finding out now that being a witness of bullying is another risk category that is associated with negative outcomes for the children and youth who witness, we would be close to 100%, meaning that nearly all kids in school are involved in bullying if we were to include the witnessing component, which is not here. So that's one thing. It's almost a universal phenomena for kids in our schools today. The other thing you might notice is over the years of this survey, and especially through the last decade, the first decade of this century, where a lot more attention was given to bullying prevention in schools, and where we collected this data, you see that the bars don't move very much across the surveys. And if you look at the total numbers there, 78, 74, 75. So there's been a lot going on through that decade as prevention efforts ramped up and continue to ramp up in this decade, but we're not yet seeing the kind of significant change in these numbers that tell us that there's less bullying and victimization going on in our schools. So that tells us we still have an awful lot of work to do to understand why these numbers are not moving and what we need to do to make them move downwards. And yeah, I guess that would be my last point on that. The next slide, very quickly, I don't want to go too much of a big deal about this, but just to point out why we're really concerned about this, because bullying and victimization are associated with these very negative outcomes. And these numbers represent, so these are the different groups here, and now we've included the group of kids who say they're not involved in bullying at all in the last 2 months, along with the kids who bully others, kids who are victimized, and then the kids who are in both roles in that group. And you'll see there's a linear relationship across these groups as the numbers climb as we go across that graph, showing that involvement in bullying, the more you're involved in bullying, the more negative health, physical and mental health outcomes are associated with that involvement. So that the kids in the both group, though the ones who are being victimized and bullying others, are at very high risk for these negative mental and physical health outcomes. And below, they're listed there. They include depression, being nervous, lonely, sad, insomnia. So that's what, and you'll also notice in terms of the colors there, the boys are green, the girls are red. That girls are, disproportionately affected by the negative outcomes in this sample. And these numbers come from the 2010, the most latest version of the survey. So just to give you an overview, bullying is virtually a universal problem for children and youth in our schools, and it is associated with lots of negative health outcomes. And the more kids are involved in bullying, both in these different roles, whether they bully other kids or whether they're victimized, and we also know by the amount of bullying they're exposed to, that the risks of these negative outcomes increase. So just to talk about bullying prevention efforts that are going on in Canada now and put it into kind of some context, here are a list of things, some pretty recent changes, and most of these, I've taken them from the Ontario context, but I know that they are also going on in other provinces. Quebec recently passed legislation, and I think I heard Francois referring to that a little bit in his talk. So in any case, here in Ontario, we have regulations that require bullying prevention programs in every school in the province. We also have regulations that schools have to assess every 2 years the school climate and the rates of bullying that are going on in their schools. So that's all schools across Ontario. So that's a pretty massive output of effort and resources to understand what are going on in schools. And these are fairly recent. I think the requirement for assessing bullying and school climate now is they've been through 2 iterations of that. So 3 or 4 years old at the most. There's a recent regulation in Ontario schools where teachers are required to report to principals and principals to parents when kids are victimized in their schools, and this includes bullying incidents. And with all of the attention given to bullying, and especially high-profile cases in the media that we're all familiar with, often associated with unfortunate suicides, there are the expectations that parents have and that society has in general about doing something about bullying have increased dramatically. I was in elementary school in the 70s, high school late 70s and early 80s, and I have no single recollection of the word bullying ever being mentioned in my K-12 years in school. That is clearly not the case these days. So there's obviously a much higher awareness about the problem of bullying, and along with it, expectations from parents and other stakeholders in the community that we have to do something about this. And the last point there that is the creep of lawsuits. It's not at all like it is in the U.S. I was on a panel at the U.S. Department of Education a couple of years ago speaking to a lawyer who represents school boards when they're dealing with lawsuits. And he was telling me about, the terrain in the U.S., as we well know, is considerably more litigious than in Canada. So lawsuits galore related to bullying going on in there. We've had a few here in Canada, and I don't know the exact number. I'm familiar with a few of them that have happened, but it's something that's on the radar here. The increase in lawsuits related to bullying. So I wanted to talk to you about So what's up with prevention and our efforts? Are they paying off? Are prevention programs effective? It's an important question. Monica's presentation on evaluation was a good introduction to the technical aspects of this, and this question can only be answered by this kind of research. I think the best way to look at this is to look at a particular class of studies that we call meta-analysis, and there are a number of them. Tina presented one related to social aggression. I'm going to talk about a number of meta-analyses that have been conducted on general bullying prevention programs that have been done in schools to give you this overview. It's the best way to look at the research evidence, because what meta-analysis does, it combines in a single study, in a single meta-analysis, it takes a whole bunch of studies that have been done, and the data points are the effects that come out of each individual study. So it permits us to look at trends across groups of studies and gives us a much clearer view of the bigger picture than a single study can. And I'm going to talk about, I'm going to talk about 4 of these reviews. They're probably the most widely cited ones in the literature. There are a few more. They all essentially have the same flavor, so these 4 are good to be illustrative of them. The first one that was published was one that I did with a colleague here at the Faculty of Social Science, Barry Schneider, with some input from colleagues in the UK. We published in 2004, and we collected 14 program evaluation studies on bullying prevention, but the programs were specifically about whole school, and whole school is an approach that comes out of really out of Norway, and Dan Olveus' work, and he's been was an early leader in the field of bullying prevention. The approach essentially, this comprehensive approach, engages all levels of the school. So we're working with kids, teachers at the classroom level, at the school level. We're bringing in parents, that sort of stuff. So what we did is we collected as many studies as we could find that evaluated a whole school program, and up to 2003, from the very beginning to 2003. So we only found 14 of them, which is not a lot. And we included both controlled studies and uncontrolled studies. And I noticed in Monica's presentation, she didn't even talk about uncontrolled studies, because normally that's not high quality research evidence. But I guess we were so desperate to put together a sample, we included the uncontrolled studies, because without them we would not have had enough to look at for this review. And they are published out there. So in terms of the findings, what we found was across these 14 studies, nearly all of them had a negligible effect. That means they really had no discernible effect on decreasing the amount of bullying or victimization that was going on, with the exception of the Olveus program in Norway, which was a very well established and well-resourced program that was implemented across the whole country and had been evaluated for over a period of time. So that was really the only program that stood out to show consistent results in decreasing the levels of bullying and victimization. So that was the first one, review that was done. And there's been a couple of follow-ups to that. Ken Murrell and his colleagues in the US published one, a similar kind of study. They took a different angle at it. I chatted with Ken at one point, and he says he was working on the same one as Barry and I were working on here, and when he saw ours published, he had to change gears and do it differently. And so what they did was, in theirs, instead of simply looking at bullying and victimization outcomes, they looked at all the outcomes that were measured in these bullying prevention evaluation studies, and there's a lot of them. And he also included controlled and uncontrolled studies. Up to the end of 2004, they found 16 evaluation studies. Again, these numbers are not, these are small numbers for meta-analyses. You can have meta-analyses that go up into the hundreds of studies. So these are very small. What they found was, when they looked at all these different outcomes, which included, for example, knowledge, what did you learn in the bullying prevention program about what is bullying and how can it be stopped and these sorts of things. Attitudes, do kids have attitudes that support bullying behaviors, support aggression, these sorts of stuff. And the behavioral ones are really the ones about, do kids bully other kids? Are they victimized? Specific kinds of behaviors. And what they found was the effects of all of these different ones put together, about 1/3 of them were significant, meaning there was positive changes, but 2/3 of the outcomes were unaffected by the programs. And as it turns out, most of the ones that were affected by the programs are the knowledge and attitude ones, and the behavioral outcomes like reducing bullying and victimization were much less affected by the programs. So they came to a similar conclusion as we did, that there were still not good, strong evidence that bullying prevention was doing what it was designed to do, which was to reduce bullying and victimization. So this is in the very early going. Since then, there was a study by David Farrington and Toffee in 2009, and they did, again, another meta-analysis, and kind of similar to the ones that I did and Ken Merrill did. One thing that jumps out right away is, first of all, they have 44 evaluation studies to work with, and that's only their controlled studies. They eliminated the uncontrolled studies. So what's happened between 2004 and 2009 is a real spike in evaluation research on bullying prevention, okay? So probably one of the most important outcomes of the attention that it got in the last decade is that we started paying attention to this from a research perspective and using evaluation science to understand, is this working or not? So that is an important finding of this one. They looked at all programs designed that prevented bullying, so they didn't have a narrow focus like our whole school one did. What they found was, across studies, 5 minutes, wow, I'm having too much fun up here. 20%, they found a 20% average reduction in bullying victimization rates across the board, which is a relatively small effect size, but we'll take what we can get. When you look at the specific programs, we found that 19 had positive outcomes, 25 though not positive outcomes. So I'm going to have to just absolutely race through the rest of this. Where do I want to go? They looked at what components of programs were connected with successful outcomes, and here's a list. They found parent involvement, punitive disciplinary methods. Don't know much about the detail of that, and punitive methods is not something that we at PrevNet promote, but there it is. They found that programs of longer duration and greater training, not surprisingly, were associated with better outcomes and programs offered to older students. And one last one, which is kind of interesting, and this is the most recent, up to 2010, they looked at to what degree do programs encourage bystanders to intervene in bullying, and this is becoming a big issue in bullying prevention research, the role of bystanders and how they can help attenuate bullying. And they found 6 out of the 12 studies that they found had positive results and 6 did not. So, very quickly summing up, what do we know? Bullying prevention programs are effective. Some bullying prevention programs are effective in reducing bullying and reducing victimization and increasing bystander intervention. But some bullying prevention programs, roughly about half across all these studies, and Tina's was similar. Some bullying prevention programs are not yet supported by evidence of effectiveness. There's the whole question of implementation and processes. Monica mentioned them. This is an extremely important issue that we're very concerned about in the bullying prevention area that would require at least another 20 minutes to talk about. So I'm going to move on. And we are, so with what this says is that there's an awful lot that we need to know and learn about in order to maximize the use of our resources that are being put into bullying prevention with these kinds of outcomes, right? So some programs are working. What is it about those programs that makes them work? And why are these other programs not showing positive effects for reducing bullying victimization? So we have an awful lot to learn. And at PrevNet, Deb Pepler is one of our scientific directors of PrevNet. We're working on a research agenda for the next 10 years to try and figure this out. And these are some of the questions that we are pondering and want to put into the test over the next decade. So, for example, what age should bullying prevention with children begin? How can prevention benefits be carried across developmental transitions, for example, elementary to middle school? How does bullying prevention in one context, like a school, transfer to another? Because they're the same kids that go to school, go to hockey practice in the afternoon or soccer practice or go to band or whatever it is. And what's happening across those contexts? How must prevention programs be adapted for different groups? For example, different cultural and ethnic groups, gender groups, geographic across urban and rural areas and onward. What's the role of the media? That's a really important one that we're interested in, and how can it impact either positively or negatively bullying in children's lives? What's the impact of policy, regulations, and laws? There's lots of talk about that. We often get calls for interviews when somebody comes out with a new law related to bullying. Most recently, it was the federal government, Peter MacKay, announcing the law related to the distribution of intimate images. We don't really know what impacts those have downstream on kids and their behaviors. And here's my last one. What are the critical ingredients? So that Farrington and Toffee study was the first window on there are some things that stand out as being promoting positive results. We need to know a lot more about that. That was just an initial look at it. The critical ingredients of effective program implementation, that's that process stuff, how we actually roll out these programs in schools, and what elements contribute to long-term sustainability. So when you invest a couple of years in bullying prevention, how do we keep that stuff going so it's there for new groups of kids that come through the schools? Thank you very much for your attention today. Thank you very much.
Merci beaucoup, David. On a quelques minutes pour des questions. Est-ce qu'il y a quelqu'un? Perfect.
Hi, my name is Landon Pearson. I have a question because I don't actually hear too much the voice of children in all this. I hear people talking about children. I hear people saying we ask children certain questions. But I'm reminded of back in the days when the big issue was sexual abuse, and when the real complications were what actual language can you use when you ask questions to children about their experience. And I remember Jim Garbarino saying you can only ask, there can only be as many words in the question as there is the age of the child. And it was always, you can say, is it red if it's a 3-year-old, but you can't leading questions. So I have a real question about leading questions, because I want to pick up on what David said about when he was at school or later, that bullying was not a word that he heard. Now the bullying is a word, so when you ask a child about whether he or she has been a bully or being bullied or a victim, have we invented a language that they are now using to describe certain kinds of behaviors? I'm not saying that there's no bullying. That's not what I'm saying. But I'm saying that it does have sometimes that sense of the flavor of the month. You get that question. If you want to know what we know about child development, is that it's the need to develop the skills to interact with other people, and that inevitably during the developmental process, some kids are going to be further ahead than others, and there's going to be an imbalance of power because of that, and that often the interaction between being bullied and not being bullied, or the interaction between among girls in particular, and I think I have so many granddaughters, and I had a lot of daughters too, so I can remember all those times. So I think as you're developing your evaluation programs, are you being really, really careful about the language that you use, and really engaging young people to help you design your program, design your evaluation programs? I think I'd like to recommend that, so I don't know, some comments.
Sure. Is this on? Is it on? We're not on? No, we're on. Okay. Thank you for the hard question and for Tina handing it over to me, Senator Landon Pearson. Those are excellent comments, and I have to tell you, to the meetings that I attend with colleagues, we really wrestle with that. I don't think we have definitive and final answers around the language that we use. There is research that shows that different stakeholders in the field and schools understand the concept of bullying differently based on whether we provide a definition or we don't provide a definition. Yeah, I would say there's a lot of discussion and controversy around that, how we word our questions on surveys, and researchers that I work with are generally very mindful of that without yet having really solved the puzzle of language around that. Tina.
Yeah, I would just say the same thing, Landon. I think that we're quite sensitized to the issue. I think we're struggling with how best to address it. Certainly, in my lab, there's lots of debates about methodology. Should we ask, have you been bullied? Should we say bullying is when, and give a definition, and then say, has this happened to you? Or should we give a list of behaviors or acts that could have occurred and ask, has this happened to you? And I think that we tend to use the list of behaviors so that we're not leaving it up to kids to tell us what they think bullying is, and then we guess what they think bullying is. So we have tried to stick in our own research more to a list of behavioral descriptors.
Sorry, if I could just add, Tina made me think of something, being a father of 2 teenagers too, keeping up with youth culture around the kind of language they use to describe certain things and how those change can be kind of mind-boggling. And researchers we tend to be fairly fixed and we want to be very precise about the words we use and what they mean. And well, I know again as a father that these just don't square with the realities of kids and what they're living in their peer networks and in schools and stuff like that. So definitely a challenge, and the senator did mention about the voice of youth in this, and that's, I think we can do a better job. I think all of my colleagues probably would agree with that. Like we can always do more on that, and again, we are trying to be mindful, but likely falling short in some areas.
Yes. Okay. I think, Landon, your idea of involving them in the design is a big challenge, because sometimes not even adults we understand what we're really talking about. But I'm going to take it on. I have an RCT starting on in Indonesia, which is a big challenge. I don't know how I'm going to get across the cross-cultural on top of that. But you bring up a really good point. And the example of the Respect Me, the Scottish Respect Me program, which was evaluated using an action research approach, because the main goal was to understand how children perceived what made them feel safe in their environment, and allowed for a design that was more child-led to a certain extent, can serve as an example. Thank you.
Est-ce qu'il y a des autres questions? Sinon, on va terminer ici. Merci pour tout le monde. So, maintenant, on va continuer avec la prochaine et dernière séance pour aujourd'hui. Je vais inviter les jeunes et aussi Cathy Vandergriff à nous rejoindre ici.
Alors, donc, c'est le moment que vous attendez. We're getting to a final discussion. And first, we will ask our 3 panelists to share their thoughts, and then we will very briefly conclude with Tara. And in the middle, you will get a chance to ask more questions. For sure, there will be a discussion time. Donc, nous avons invité 2 jeunes personnes et aussi une spécialiste des droits de l'enfant à venir nous partager ce qu'ils pensent, leurs propres conclusions et comment est-ce qu'ils pensent qu'on devrait continuer pour les prochaines étapes. Alors, on va commencer, est-ce qu'on commence avec Zachary Johnstone, qui est étudiant en première année ici à l'Université d'Ottawa en sciences politiques et administration publique. Il est membre du conseil d'administration de Jers Vision et un des organisateurs de la Journée Rose internationale. Il aide Jers Vision dans l'organisation d'événements reliés à la lutte contre l'homophobie, le sexisme, le racisme et l'intimidation. And I think he promised to give us a little bit of a mix of French and English.
I'll try my best.
Okay.
And so, hi everybody. I'd like to start off by thanking the organizers for having us here. We're really great to be here speaking with you all. As said, I work with Jurors Vision. For those of you who don't know, Jurors Vision is a national anti-bullying and anti-discrimination organization. We focus on fighting issues relating to homophobia and transphobia, and we work from a very much youth-based perspective. So as much as we can, we have youth going into schools and talking about their experiences and engaging in a dialogue and discussion-based format. So it's not as much us going in and talking at an audience, it's very much us going in with, with an open slate, an open book, and just interacting with students in classes, usually grade 10, but also any age range. So I think that there's a lot of really interesting topics we've touched on today. One of the ones I want to talk to is youth engagement. I think that we've done a lot of talking about how we can engage youth in the process of us coming up with strategies to get into schools, but I don't think we focused enough on how to actually engage youth on the ground in schools around bullying. I think what we're talking about is a lot of the strategies and campaigns that I've seen against bullying don't actually start conversations. They just tell youth, frankly, that bullying is bad and don't bully. I don't think that actually does anything for anybody. I think that what that does is that it tells people that turns bullying into a word that's used to bully other people. I think that there's times where I've seen people call other people bullies in a context where it's actually like you're bullying somebody through the terminology of bully. And I think that what that does is it doesn't really help anybody. I think what we need to do is we need to step away from all of these campaigns that have posters up on the wall and actually take the time to sit down at the table with young people and talk to them about what bullying means. Talk to them about some of the stuff we learned today, like social aggression, relational aggression. Why are we not talking to young people about these issues? And why are we not giving them a more dynamic and complicated understanding of what bullying is? The other thing I wanted to talk to is the idea of the diversity perspective. A lot of what we've talked about today has been focusing on how our programs need to promote diversity. I think that diversity has become one of those buzzwords that we talk about but don't actually follow up on. One of the things Jurors Vision does is we speak to homophobia and transphobic issues. So we go in and talk to schools and students about what does it mean to be queer and what does it mean to not be straight, essentially. And we look at how issues like that make it so that some people are more vulnerable and marginalized than others. And I think that what we really need to do if we want to, like, our end game here is to create individuals from our schools who are able to be fully fledged, confident people who can go out into our society and be productive members. And if we need to do that, we need to look at bullying, but also look at discrimination, how they tie into one another. Because with issues like discrimination, we have to realize that we've created these concepts of glass ceilings, like we so often talk about in terms of sexism. But these glass ceilings don't only apply to sexism. We need to talk about how making the assumption that everybody in your class is straight is damaging to many students, and how we internalize concepts of homophobia, which in turn creates more bullies. We need to talk about how concepts like slut shaming play out and how that actually is has such a negative effect on women in high schools. Also on recent studies that show that men are less likely to access mental health services than anybody else is, which means that they're more likely to bully themselves because we keep telling them that everything they have to be is tough and strongly and manly. And how that leads to this idea that they must be in control, which leads to them taking on this alpha role and being aggressive to other people in order to maintain their dominance. So I think that if we really want to fight bullying, we need to expand from this really one-dimensional approach to it and look at it from as many different lenses as we can. We need to look at how we can fight mental health stigma that is stopping people from accessing services to learn about or to get the help they need. We need to look at how discrimination plays such an intimate role in preventing people from reaching their full potential and how it makes people vulnerable to marginalization and vulnerability, as well as turns some people into bullies themselves. And I think that those are issues that we really haven't taken as strong a look at as we need to. So I came into this entire thing with a really long script, and then as this conference went through, my script kind of died, especially as we just, there's so many interesting points brought up, so I'm a little bit all over the place here. But one of the things I wanted to touch on is the idea of indirectly violent language. I went to high school, and I identify as queer. And what queer is it's an umbrella term for anybody whose sexuality is not heterosexual and whose gender is not cisgender. I'm not really going to explain too much what cisgender is or because that would take a long time and it's a really complicated issue.
That's a different conference.
Yeah, but what I want to say is that I never experienced direct violence in school. What I did experience was a violent climate, a hostile climate, and use of words like, I'm going to try not to say all of them up here, but really aggressive words can create a violent context that can't directly be explained by relational aggression or social aggression or any of these other forms of bullying, but still create contexts that are in which our school climate is essentially bullying young people. And so I think that that's another one of those things we need to focus on and engage people in conversations about. Another thing is the idea of power imbalances in schools. We earlier spoke about having leadership trainings and leadership camps for young people. But what I would like to see is more of a focus on taking those people who don't have leadership skills and giving them to them. Because leadership camps seem, from my perspective, to cater very much to the demographic of people who are popular and who are outgoing leaders. And outgoing leaders and outgoing popular groups of people are often those who are in the top or the higher range of a power balance, of a power demographic, of a power spectrum. And so, thank you. And so what we need to do is we need to look at how we can take this power spectrum and shift it a little bit more. So instead of having one group of people who keep being pushed higher and higher, because they get the opportunity to go to these leadership camps, we can shift it so there's less people overall who are vulnerable and make all young people on a more equal level. So I think that's about it. I could speak a little bit more, but I think that I've spoken more than enough now, so I'll pass it over to Hannah.
Okay. So Hannah Collins is also a student. She's at the Algonquin College. She discovered feminism and queer rights at a young age of 15, and she's been also involved with Jur's Vision since 2012, I think, right? And she actually won a Leading Women Building Communities Award from the Government of Ontario last year.
So mine's gonna be a lot shorter than Zach's because he said everything I was gonna say. It's good to know we're on the same page. So I actually cannot stand the word bullying, which is ironic because when people ask me what I do, I say, oh, I work for Jur's Vision. We're an anti-bullying organization. But I've never really liked that word. And that's because, as David mentioned in the panel before, he had never heard the word bullying from K to 12. I heard it every year from K to 12. Bullying was a trendy topic. It was something we talked about. Now we've moved on to mental health, which has its own problems, but bullying was the hot topic when I was in school. And it became really problematic because it began to just be a buzzword. It was something teachers taught. It was put up on posters around the school, and we saw it in television commercials, and it always kind of showed the stereotypical bully, which was a tough kid who was beating up kids on the playground and taking their lunch money, or it was a really catty, gossipy girl who spread rumors around each other. Both of those stereotypes are pretty seriously problematic, but eventually those things just began to fade. And I didn't really think about them. They just, I flipped the channel when commercials came on TV, and I didn't really notice the posters on the walls anymore. And so bullying began to be a thing that it was a buzzword. It faded out. We didn't think about it. So when I was in high school, I actually did experience a lot of violence. And I experienced a lot of violence from my friends. I remember when I was 15, I have this story of a friend of mine thought it was funny to insult and berate me consistently, and there was a point where it just it got too far, and I ended up crying. And I was in public, and I just lost it at him, and I started crying, and everybody just kind of walked away. But I never considered this bullying. And this went on, 2 years later when we're in grade 12, he thinks it's funny to put his hands around my throat when he's angry around me and proceeds to kind of beat and punch me on a regular basis. But this isn't violence to me. This isn't bullying, because bullying was tough kids on the playground who steal each other's lunch money. This was my friend. So this began to be a problem. And then bullying I began to see, and in retrospect, a lot of it happened in high school, and a lot of it happened with people I knew and I loved. It was when my boyfriend began sexually coercing me and harassing me in public. That wasn't bullying, though, because he was loved ones. He wasn't bullies. And this is where I began to change my dialogue. This is where I began to realize that I don't like the word bullying because that's all we see. The things I experienced were what I call abuse. And abuse is a lot more problematic, and it's a lot of scarier word. And I like to use that word more because it has more weight to it. it's really scary to say that people are abused in high school. It's scary to say that their friends abuse them as opposed to bully. And so I believe that changing that word and sort of changing the vocabulary around these discussions really changes the dialogue. It changes what we talk about. We stop talking about, kids in the playground stealing each other's lunch money, and we start talking about our friends and our family and people we love and people who are close to, and how they're abusing us, and how we can be abusing each other. And it's a two-way street, and that a lot of these things aren't black and white. So I believe a huge shift in changing our language, and that's what I'm always really firm about, and then also analyzing where these things come from and why do people abuse them. Both situations I brought up were actually deeply rooted in misogyny, and both of these people were definitely acting out on sexist attitudes they had and the belief that they had a right to touch and violate women. And that's what I see as sort of a huge problem in this, and when discussing bullying, is that a lot of it is really deeply rooted in microaggression, and it's deeply rooted in oppressive attitudes we carry around with each other, and then sort of play out. So when we start discussing this, and we start discussing this as abuse and oppression, it really changes this, and it really changes what we're talking about. We start talking about violence instead of just a buzzword we throw around.
Thank you. We'll move on to our the third panelist today.
Is it okay
if for sure. So this is Kathy van der Grift. She is a past chair of the Canadian Coalition for the Rights of Children. She's been advocating for the implementation of the Convention on the Rights of the Child for a long time, and she led a recent comprehensive review of the implementation of this convention in Canada, and she advocates the use of the convention as a sound policy tool in Canada, including for violence prevention, and using a variety of tools such as child rights impact assessments and other tools.
So how do I which one make this go? This way?
That way, I think, or the middle button also should work.
All right.
Yeah.
All right. Well, what does the convention and what do children's rights have to do with all we've discussed? And you're going to hear some common themes. But I would like to put forward the thesis that one of the best ways to reduce violence, and that's the word I will use throughout, is to teach and practice children's rights in schools. I hope you will hear me out before you dismiss me as a hopeless idealist. But I think the convergence between what we've been talking about today, about fostering rights-respecting relationships to prevent violence, and putting the Convention of the Rights of the Child into practice makes sense, conceptually and practically. So why does a children's rights perspective make sense? If we respect children's rights, they're treated as full persons with dignity, active agents with rights and responsibilities, and that link is essential to prevent violence, and we've heard a bit about that today. The Convention provides a comprehensive framework. It deals with all children, all aspects of life. It addresses the causes of violence we've heard about here, including structural violence, which we haven't really talked about today, the way we structure society that actually marginalizes people. Prevention, protection, and participation of young people are integrated into one framework, and it speaks to the role of all actors: children, parents, schools, communities, and governments. The Convention, which almost all nations have ratified, provides a comprehensive framework for the prevention of violence that already has status as international law. So our challenge is implementing it. Now, to many people, talk about children's rights sounds idealistic, and I heard earlier today maybe it puts some people off. Does it work in practice? Let's ask that question. Research on the impact of teaching and practicing children's rights in schools is accumulating. Hampshire County school system in the United Kingdom, for example, embarked on a deliberate program not just to teach children their rights, but to practice them. They used a program entitled 3 R's, Rights, Respect, and Responsibility. 2- and 3-year evaluations included comparisons between schools who implemented it and those who did not, what we've just learned about in evaluation. And the findings indicated that the schools that developed rights-respecting cultures have fewer incidents of bullying, more cooperation between students in problem solving, less confrontations, improved self-regulation of behavior, less aggressive talk, more respectful exchanges between teachers and students, and more positive attitudes among teachers. So what's there about children's rights in the Convention that could lead to these results? I'm going to outline quickly some core principles, some of the specific provisions, and then some avenues for implementation. Now, is this working? First is non-discrimination. The Convention is very clear that it's about all rights, all children. Every child has dignity and worth. And if we teach children and help them learn early that all children have both rights and responsibilities, it reduces that focus on status, power that we've been talking a lot today. The best interests of the child have priority in decisions. If adults respect children's rights, they give top priority to what is best for the child when they make decisions. That applies to both individual children and groups of children. Now, we may have different views about what's in the best interest of children, and that could be a whole debate in itself. But at least we put children first. And we know that effective strategies to prevent violence, as we heard about today, are centered on the well-being of children. Third is the right to development of a child's full potential. We heard our young people talk about that today. The right in the Convention is more than survival, the right to life. It's a right to develop and exercise one's potential, full potential. And I think if we focus on helping young people do that, developing their own abilities, we've talked today about self-esteem, social skills, that is the most powerful antidote we can have to bullying and violence. And then finally is participation and respect for the views of children. We've talked a fair bit about that today. In the interest of time, maybe I'll move on. But just to say, it doesn't mean children make the decisions and have authority, but it does mean we commit to listening to them and involving them in decision making. And that's central to violence. So in general terms, there is a conversion on the core principles. Our challenge is putting these into practice. But I believe that children's rights gives us an existing comprehensive framework to work with. So let's look at some specific provisions. Protection from discrimination. As well as not discriminating themselves, states are required to protect children from discrimination by others. And again, we heard our young people talk about the important connection between discrimination against groups of people in our society and violence. This is a significant issue in Canada. It has come up at the UN, at the review of Canada, at the UN Committee on the Rights of the Child, but it has received very little attention in our country. It is a federal responsibility under Canadian law, but little has been done about UN recommendations. One reason they argue is because, oh, that's provincial, that's federal. Earlier today we got into that. What I would like to submit to you is that there are rights-based tools that could be used to address the problem of discrimination in Canada, and I would submit that might be one very good avenue to pursue if we want to prevent violence. Exposure of discrimination through evidence-based comparisons between the situation of children in different places and different groups, not just focusing on bullying, but the discrimination against them. Public reporting on the conditions of children in Canada using the Convention as a framework, and establishing a complaint mechanism, not just for bullying, but a complaint mechanism for discrimination against groups of children that would allow those to be resolved in good ways. And finally, of course, some of us want to see the appointment of a National Children's Commissioner who could go out and really expose where we are discriminating against groups of children. I want to move on quickly to the purpose of education. We hear a lot about access to education, and in Canada that has led to compulsory primary schools. It's leading now to diversity in secondary schools. I won't spend much time on that in the interest of time. But the second clause in Article 28 addresses school discipline. It's to be administered in a manner that is consistent with a child's human dignity. We didn't hear a lot of discussion about that today, but when I talk with young people, I certainly hear a lot about the kind of discipline that's still exercised in schools. I would argue that more rigorous and systematic use of the convention to ground a rights-based approach to discipline would be a good intervention. The more interesting area is the relatively unknown Article 29. It articulates a purpose for education that goes well beyond what's found in most provincial education systems in Canada. It talks about the whole child. It talks about respect for different cultures. It talks about preparation for life in community. Read the last one. There's a big difference between just teaching children about human rights. We heard about that today, what they say on paper, but developing respect for human rights. And we know that if schools take this seriously in the curriculum, it can have an impact on reducing violence. I would argue that changing our education system would be a good thing for us to work on, and that would certainly require a multi-layered strategy going everywhere from local school boards up to the Council of Ministers of Education. In Canada, report cards on education have become popular tools to try and stimulate education reform. Many of them are based on a market model of education, preparing children for the workplace. I wonder what would happen if there was a report card that evaluated education on the basis of Article 29 of the Convention. Then there's freedom of expression and freedom of thought. The Convention provides freedom of expression and freedom of thought for children, but it also talks about their responsibility to respect the rights of others. And these two provisions also talk about parents. Earlier today, there was some discussion about how do we deal with this issue of parents. Some people think children's rights are anti-parent. They are not. The Convention deals with parents in both rights and responsibilities, but it teaches what that role of parents and children is. And I would argue that the provisions about freedom of expression, freedom of thought, could provide a very strong basis for the kind of dialogue that needs to happen in communities and between parents and children. And then finally, there is freedom from violence. The Convention protects the rights of children to be free from all violence. And protective measures include a full range of initiatives, such as we've been talking about today: violence prevention, support for children, follow-up cases to child maltreatment. I'm pleased to say that a recent ruling at the Supreme Court of BC in the polygamy case affirmed that governments are obligated to take measures to prevent abuse and violence, as well as to prosecute after the fact. But that is not very much implemented across the country. They should be taking all measures to reduce violence. One of the contentious issues, the Convention refers to all forms of violence. One of them is corporal punishment. There's significant empirical research to show that corporal punishment can be harmful and that other methods of discipline are more effective. In 2006, the World Report on Violence Against Children linked corporal punishment with other forms of violence and proposed all countries abolish corporal punishment. That's a contentious issue in Canada. And in our country, this provision has become a lightning rod for opposition to the whole concept of the rights of children. It's used to create fear that recognizing the rights of children will undermine the ability of parents to discipline. I argue this distortion is serious for both children's rights and the prevention of violence, but it's an area where mutual strategies among us could be helpful. And then finally, the right to play. And we heard a little bit today about using play, but you know, if you read really what the children's right says about the right to play and what's all involved in there, it would actually become a tool itself to prevent violence. How am I doing on time? Racing here. So I guess my argument would be that promoting the rights of children across Canada could be one of the most effective strategies to prevent violence and achieve a lot of other goals at the same time. First, of course, is awareness in public education. Surveys and polls show that 75% of Canadian children do not know about their rights. I noted 75% experience bullying. I never put that together before. But that's certainly something that we need to change. A second common tool is monitoring what is happening in the lives of children and using empirical research to identify priorities for sustained, measurable areas of improvement. A third tool is the distribution of good practices. Oh, that didn't go forward. Good practices in programming. We heard a lot today about small projects. What a rights-based approach could do is scale that up so it applies in every community and every context where children are growing up. That's not to diminish the value of small programs, but we certainly need to look at what would it take to scale that up in Canada. And the fourth tool is policy development. The fact that governments have ratified the convention and are required to report on its implementation is an advantage for getting attention at a public policy level. Tools such as child impact assessments could be used, but translating these research findings we talked about today from the pilot project phase into broad-based public policies that would help all children could be a real advantage. And we know that children's advocates in some countries, such as Australia and the United Kingdom, play important roles to give young people a voice, what we heard about today. One of our challenges is that children's rights are a low priority for political parties. Young people under the age of 18 do not vote, so there is less ballot box incentive to pay attention to the rights of children. That's, I think, a challenge that we need to take on across the country. So what are some next steps? Well, I guess I would like to encourage you to ask how the convention relates to your work. If you're an academic, use it in your analysis and help raise awareness about it. If you're a programmer, use it in your programming to help raise awareness about it. And become advocates for children's rights. They are needed at all levels in the education sector. I heard with a little bit of itching in my feet today, well, we ought to avoid the rights language because, you know, it might offend someone. I would argue that it is the Convention on the Rights of the Child that will give us the framework we need if we work at it and implement it, and the first step is to use it and talk about it. And certainly when we talk about it with parents, if communities understand rights of children, it's not this great big fearful thing. That's what we need to get over. Well, one of our goals is to get the attention of the Council of Ministers of Education as an avenue for systemic change throughout Canada. Perhaps there's people in the room who could help us figure out how to do that one. Academic researchers can help to provide the evidence for monitoring progress. And then we talked already about building on good practices and pilot projects so that everyone can contribute to continuous improvement, with our goal being the full integration of children's rights in all aspects of education in Canada. We could each use whatever influence we have to make children's rights a core part of our education systems, and right now it's way off on the margins. Remember what young people said at the last special session for children. A world fit for children, including a world free of violence, is a world fit for all of us. Thank you.
Alors, merci, thank you to the three of you. Do we have questions in the audience? Est-ce que vous voulez faire des commentaires ou poser des questions? On a du temps. There is time for questions for Zach, Hannah, and Kathy.
I thought there'd be lots of questions for you. That was very interesting. And
I have to say that some of the things that I heard from the three of you really struck a chord. Par exemple, quand Zach a parlé de le fait d'appeler quelqu'un un bully, c'est problématique. Ça peut être considéré comme de l'intimidation, juste le nom bully. Aussi le fait, un peu la critique des programmes de leadership. Moi, c'est quelque chose qui ça me travaille, là. C'est quelque chose auquel je pense, une chose à laquelle je pense depuis longtemps, c'est comment faire participer tous les enfants et tous les jeunes, parce que quand on parle, when we talk about child participation, usually it is the leaders, the leader types who end up being the ones who participate in child participation, youth participation events, youth engagement. It is all about the leaders, and then, you know, giving money to programs that further that instead of bringing everybody to, you know, programs that benefit everybody, as you said. I think that's something that really is of importance, just to think about it. Penser comment est-ce qu'on peut impliquer tout le monde, et tous les jeunes, tous les enfants doivent pouvoir participer, pas seulement ceux qui sont déjà des leaders nés, il y en a évidemment, et puis ce sont ceux-là qui vont être choisis par l'école, vont être choisis par leur club, vont être choisis à chaque fois, plus tard à l'université, pour être les représentants de tous. Et ça ne peut pas fonctionner comme ça ne peut pas être ça seulement la participation des enfants et des jeunes. And that was also a bit related to what you said, Hannah, about the fact that you don't like the word bullying. And this is one reason why we actually didn't put the word bullying in the title of the conference, because there is something problematic with the word bullying, and we felt that violence was perhaps more appropriate and also a wider term.
It's more honest.
Honest, as you say, yeah, honest.
May I make a controversial comment about that? And
okay, go ahead.
Shoot back. I think part of the use of the word bullying has shifted then the attention that this is a problem between young people. And it shifted the problem away from the context that we, for young people. Because when we talk about bullying, it tends to be a lot between young people. And I think we've shifted attention away from what kind of context are we creating for our young people to grow up free from violence. That's, for me, why violence is a better term.
And especially that, I get these images from Wayne's presentation earlier, how, violence in some contexts then just leads to violence, by the child, whether it's against a pet or a friend, or it's all that has that trickle-down effect. Well, if you just talk about bullying, you don't get that full picture, right, of where the violence is coming from. And then, of course, Kathy, well, that just struck so many chords parce que en fait, on va vous le dévoiler avec Tara. Donc ça, c'est une conférence annuelle du laboratoire de recherche interdisciplinaire sur les droits de l'enfant qu'on a mis sur pied à l'Université d'Ottawa il y a quelques années. Donc c'est un réseau. So it's a small but growing network. It's an initiative we have to bring in people from different disciplines to talk about child rights and work on do research projects on child rights and work with community partners on child rights. So we have a yearly conference. Et donc la thématique de cette année, en fait, nous l'avons choisie en lien avec un projet de recherche que nous avons ensemble avec Tara. Un petit projet de recherche, mais on en est au début. C'est justement sur la définition d'une approche fondée sur les droits de l'enfant qu'on peut appliquer à la lutte contre la violence dans le contexte des écoles. Donc voilà.
On a une question.
Et on a une question, et donc on pourra...
Ça va.
Oui, on peut prendre la question puis continuer la discussion après. Ouais.
So I'd like to thank Zach and Hannah so much for sharing their really important views and their really interesting stories with us. I work with Tina, and I'm a researcher. And we go into schools and we try to create discussion around these issues. And I think sometimes we have a little bit of a hard time when we go into classrooms and how to create a safe space for kids in classrooms, especially for those who are really vulnerable and they don't really want to share their ideas. So, I mean, I would like to ask you guys on how we can create a safe space.
Okay, so I'm one of the educational coordinators. I'm going to move this closer to my face. I've got a loud voice, but I also like to use microphones. It's fun. So I'm one of the educational coordinators at Jared's Vision, which means that 2 days a week I'm in schools on a regular basis working with kids and teaching workshops about diversity and anti-bullying. And we work really hard to make safe spaces. And a way we do that is by being able to connect with the kids and open up with them. We find at first, when we start talking to them, a lot of the children will be really hesitant and reserved, and they don't necessarily want to open up or feel comfortable with things. But then when you get the ball rolling, you realize that we're really a lot of like. Not just because sometimes I go and I teach grade 12 students and I'm 19 and they're 17, and we're basically the same age, but also because we realize that we have a lot of similar experiences because we're all people. Sometimes I'll go and I'll teach grade 8 classes, and all I gotta do is impress them, and the only way I can impress them is I tell them something I know that they know. I go, I watch Adventure Time, you watch Adventure Time, now we're friends. But really that connection is what's important, and definitely throughout the day we've seen a really consistent idea of mentor and child relationships are important, and adult-child relationships are important. And as an older person coming into classes and also presenting as an authority figure because I'm a presenter, I believe that relationship is important, and I believe that bonding and connecting with kids in order for them to open up with us is super important, especially when we teach workshops. I occasionally teach workshops on healthy relationships and sexual consent, as well as specifically girl hate and girl-on-girl bullying. And in those workshops, it takes a lot to be able to open up with kids. And when I start them off by telling them stories about my own experiences and things that not just I've experienced, but also things I've done, especially in the girl-on-girl workshop. That sounds creepy to say. The girl-on-girl hate workshop is really important, in which I tell them, I've used these words too. I've bullied as well. This is what we do, and that's okay. And then they realize that these are all experiences we can have, and we can open up, and we can start this dialogue. Being able to relate to children, I think, is what's the most important thing to be able to build safe spaces.
And on that same note, I just want to add something about, like Hannah just mentioned the idea of of bullies, like people self-identifying sometimes as bullies. And I think that what we've created this idea that some people, like I said earlier, that some people are bullies, and that the bullies, like the term bullies, used as a word to attack people nowadays. But I also think it really shows that people can go from one context of being bullies themselves to other contexts where they're victims. So it's a very fluid dynamic. So you can't just say this person's a bully and this person's a victim. In certain social contexts, some people will be in a different power balance. So it's a much more complex and dynamic issue than we really give it credit for being, because we can't really know, like, there's so many different situations that young people are impacted by. For example, like if I played on a hockey team, if I was on a hockey team, I might be quieter. I might be, because there's a lot of more aggressive people on the team, because like teenage boys, aggression sometimes, you know. Or if I was in a school context, in a class discussion, I might be more dominant. So it's looking at like how different people act differently in different situations, and how bullying is not always going to be the same people, and people can shift roles in that relationship.
I think the experience in terms of rights respecting schools would also be that the more we help children understand that they do have rights, allows them also to speak and to begin to speak up for themselves. Mm-hmm. I think that's an important component of that. Just that notion that they are treated as active agents with rights and responsibilities in combination, but that stance we take toward children can allow them to speak for themselves.
And I just want to add one more thing that so I'm looking through my notes here, and I realize I spoke a lot, but I also missed some of my favorite things to talk about. So one of them is, I think we need to step away a little bit from this concept, this focus on the bystanders. I think we need to look more at the underlying issues, because when I hear, like, when I hear the idea of a bystander, it's putting a lot of responsibility on one young person to step into a conflict. And if we think about how lots of bullying comes from this power relationship where it's, and this is just one type, but when there's a popular student who is in some way bullying a less popular student, who is the one that we're expecting to step in here? Are we expecting the others, the peers of this unpopular or like less socially outgoing student to step in? Because they might, like, if they're in the peer group, they are all probably in the same social position within the school community. actively? Or are we expecting one of the one of the more popular students to step in? How can we expect somebody to step in against their own friend? And how can we expect somebody else to step in to support their friend when they themselves are seen as less, as lower on the hierarchical scale in terms of who's popular in a school? So I think this bystander focus, it's largely redundant. I think that we're not going to be able to fight bullying effectively if all we're focusing on is the concept of the bystander as opposed to looking at systemic issues. And I think like the biggest thing we need to talk about is mental health in this issue. The idea that so many people, like I have this thing I call the cult of masculinity. It's kind of my favorite words because it sounds really awesome because it's cult and it's masculinity and it's like, yes. But what it is it's like I spoke a bit to this earlier, but it's like this idea that men have to be really, really aggressive and really, really tough. And I think that if we can fight against mental health stigma, which there's actually a ton of red tape around in schools now, but if we can target that, it would be so much more useful because we can stop telling boys that they have to be tough. Like there was recently a video called The Mask You Live In, which I suggest you all Google, because it's essentially a video that looks at how we create these men who are so tough, so unable to be sensitive. And it looks at how these young people are unable to access mental health services and so have to find other ways to vent their aggression and anger. So I think that we just need to shift a little bit of the focus and where we're advocating for mental health and bullying.
I'd like to address a couple of comments. In terms of the idea of the bystander stepping in, I wanted to kind of clarify the way I think about bystander engagement. And Christina Samavelli, who's running probably one of the world's best anti-bullying programs right now in Finland, has done some really interesting research to show that in a school, it's not characteristics of individual children that determine how much bullying is occurring. It's the attitudes and values and norms and beliefs of the peer group. So when I think about bystanders intervening, a lot of people think we're talking about, well, get in there and separate out the fight, and that's not what I mean. There's a wide range of way that children can intervene, and I know, I always say, when I started the Ottawa Anti-Bullying Coalition in 2003, I met a lot of people who'd been very seriously harmed by bullying, and no one ever said to me, I wish that bully had been punished more. But what they all said was, I wish someone had said that what happened to me was not okay. Because no one said anything, I thought that everyone agreed that I deserved what I got. And so often when I talk about bystander intervention, I'm talking about some time and some other point in the hall when there's no one around saying, hey, I saw what happened to you on the playground, and I didn't think that was okay.
So you're saying essentially that we're normalizing the behavior of bullying by not talking about the issues.
And that's what I also wanted to raise. I was really interested in your perception of not using the word bullying because you want to use a stronger word, violence. Because when I go to schools, principals say to me, could you do a workshop on bullying, but don't use the word bully. Okay, like soften it somehow. Use a nicer word than bully. And so it's interesting that you don't think bullying is a strong enough word because often I see the opposite. So I just thought I would throw that out.
I'd really like to see that principal's face when you go in and use the word abusive instead of bullying. I'd like to be a part of that workshop. I'm really glad you actually brought that up about bystanders because I completely agree. Bystanders, I found it odd in the earlier presentation by the Red Cross, in which there was the obvious consensus that bullying is not an isolated incident, and then the statistic that if you intervene, bullying can end within 10 seconds. And it was kind of based on this concept that it, in fact, was an isolated incident and can be solved by stepping in. But which, in fact, bystander it's not a person, it's a culture. And it's a culture that I believe can end when we start promoting positive relationships with each other. It goes from, instead of stepping into where you see bullying, because often our cultures, when I was growing up, I specifically remember this, there was a very broad culture of you don't get in, like, people have their business and you don't invade their business. Like people got to do what they got to do, and that doesn't mean that you have every right to constantly go in and, voice your opinion. Like, it doesn't have anything to do with you. And so I would see a lot of instances of bullying, and I would see a lot of instances of, friends fighting and stuff, rumors getting thrown around. But it was always like, but that's not my business. Like, I'm not going to get involved. And that culture really began to end sort of in my last year of high school, and now is continuing. When we started building positive relationships with each other, with my friends, and everybody involved in my life, it stopped being a focus of how can I end this, instead of how can I be a better friend to this person? And then when people have positive relationships in their lives, things like the abuse they experience, they begin to get out of those situations. They begin to sort of feel better about themselves, and there's more to say. In my girl-on-girl hate bullying workshop, those words didn't make any sense, I'm sorry. In my girl-on-girl hate workshop, I often talk about that, and a lot of the students really agree with me when I say that when you have a group of supportive friends, when you have a group of supportive girlfriends, the catty girls and the girls who are yelling insults at you, they seem to not matter less. And when those people are your friends, because the truth is, most of the abuse we experience is with close ones and with loved ones. But when you start to sort of build more honest, more positive relationships with each other, when we see these things happen, when we see friends throw around insults and belittle and degrade each other, when we step in and we go, hey, that isn't cool, and I'm going to be a better friend to that person, and I'm going to work a little harder at that relationship, those other relationships, they slowly begin to fade and they slowly begin to drop off. I know that from my experiences. I know that when I'm talking to students that really begins to happen, and that bystanders, that culture really stops when we start focusing on building more positive relationships with each other.
And I would argue part of that positive relationships, because that term's been used, is learning about rights and responsibilities
Absolutely.
toward one another. Because a positive relationship can turn negative on a dime among some young people, but what the research shows, if they have some understanding about what are the rights of persons and our responsibilities to one another as persons, that gives a little more heft, I think, to that. What kind of relationships are we talking about here? It's not just nice, you know? Treat each other as persons with dignity and respect.
All right, just because I think I kind of love talking, I think the other thing...
That's why we're here.
Yeah, I know. But the other thing we need to think about is the limitations that we see in how organizations and nonprofits can actually address these issues. I think I love the kind of work that our organization, that other organizations out there do, but one of the biggest things we focus on is changing the system and changing the curriculum. And I think that that's something we don't emphasize enough, and that we don't get enough educators and researchers on board with. It's really great to have organizations like ours, because we're awesome, but also because we go into schools and we start these conversations that nobody else does. But it's also, if we really want to reach everybody, we need to take it from a systemic perspective of how can we, like, systemic change. One instance of us going in and giving a workshop changes one classroom. If we have every teacher in grade 10 gym class, which is a class that everybody has to take, sitting down and talking with their students about some of these issues, we can actually see changes across the board as opposed to in specific locations. Yes, I think you should still bring us in because we're awesome, but you need to take it from this really systemic perspective on how can we create a sustainable difference in our schools.
Do we have other questions and comments? D'autres questions, de commentaires? Tara, est-ce que tu veux dire quelques mots?
I just want to say thank you very much to all the valuable contributions that we've had today. It's been really, really interesting and valuable, and I'm so glad that that we've all had this opportunity to gather and to learn from each other. One of the things that does strike me is we are always looking for solutions. Quick Band-Aids that they really end up having to be. And we encourage young people, for instance, to get help when they're in trouble, or see the guidance counselor, or see the professionals that are available to get the help. But it's interesting to me because I was doing a focus group as part of our research project just yesterday, and some of the young people are saying, yes, there are all these resources available, but when there's a problem, the young people generally don't want to seek help, because that means there's something wrong, that they need help, and they don't want to think that they need help. And that it also puts a big burden as well on the young person in question to get the help. And in some ways that that is something we need to think about beyond that, you know, the systemic change as Zach is talking about. We've all, I think a number of us agree with the importance of youth engagement. And the important thing is, are we prepared to give that engagement and what young people have to say due weight, as Article 12 calls for? Sometimes we're going to hear things we as adults or as researchers or advocates don't want to hear. But it's so important that we do hear them. And the question, what are we going to do about it? What are we going to do to respond and respect what the young people have to say? I think the valuable thing about today is that, as Zach was saying, we need to have this conversation, and that we need to move beyond buzzwords, as Hannah was saying, and think about children's rights, as Kathy was saying. And I think one of the things that strikes me is, of course, all the various contributions that we've had today. Wayne McKay, your keynote was fantastic, and Claire and Francois and Deborah and all the other speakers. We learned so much from David and Tina and Monica. All of your contributions have really helped in that conversation that has been going on for a while, and we obviously need to continue with it. And the reasons for that is that we hope that we can better respect and appreciate young people for who they are and their human rights. But I also just want to close on some words that Irwin Ellman, who's the provincial advocate for children and youth here in Ontario, he shared with me an interesting conversation that he had with a young person who has cerebral palsy and is currently in high school, who described her real excitement in starting school because she thought school would offer the best that society has to offer. And yet, in looking back in hindsight, she says that it is what society is. School reflects society. And so in a lot of ways, you know, there's the challenge that we all face. It's not just a school problem. It's not just an individual person's problem. It's all of our problems. And so what are we all going to do about it? And hopefully this conference has given us some new energy to keep the conversation going. And we obviously need that conversation to involve young people, as Kathy and Zach and Landon have all pointed out. So let's ensure that we engage young people in our advocacy, that we listen and we consider deeply, and that our research is informed by what young people have to say, and hopefully we can make progress. Just leave it at that.
Did you want to say something? No, it's okay.
No, because I'm going to be concluding, so please.
Yeah, I know. Yeah. That's why. I realize you're going to stay here forever.
Okay. Ce que je voulais dire en dernier, c'est qu'on avait demandé à aucun des conférenciers de parler spécifiquement des droits de l'enfant, alors que c'est ce qui nous intéressait évidemment avec Tara, avec notre projet de recherche. Mais on a été, enfin moi en tout cas j'étais surprise de voir beaucoup de langage commun, énormément. Donc beaucoup de thématiques, de concepts en commun, que ce soit le rights and responsibilities at all levels. Not only children understanding they have rights and responsibilities, but also talking about national, even, you know, how should we talk about a national strategy, a ministry, a commissioner? So the responsibilities need to be there everywhere. There was that. There was, of course, what came up a lot all the time was involving everybody, the whole school approach. Involving children and youth engagement, we talked about that a lot. Respectful relationships, which is very much linked to all that, to rights and responsibilities also, and the child-centered approach. Aussi la question de l'éducation inclusive ou de la pédagogie inclusive, je trouve que c'est tellement au cœur de ce qui se passe, de ce qui se passe à l'école, de la culture qu'on a à l'école. Est-ce que tout le monde va être inclus? Est-ce que tout le monde va se sentir inclus? Et puis, relié à ça, bien sûr, la lutte contre la discrimination, et puis penser à tous les groupes plus vulnérables ou plus marginalisés ou plus qui ne sont pas inclus parmi ces jeunes leaders, etc., ou parmi ceux qui sont peut-être plus à même d'avoir des gestes de violence ou intimidants. Juste une petite anecdote. At my children's daycare after school daycare center, they organized a talk on bullying. For first, the first part was for children only. That was really like younger than kindergarten to age 12, and for different groups, and then to parents later in the evening who wanted to come. And there was a very interesting presentation by a young man in his 30s who does this a lot, who does presentations on bullying, and he confessed that he used to be a bully. And he really recognized that, and he didn't know it at the time when he was a bully. And he said he was a bully a lot in grade 8, and he enjoyed it very much. What he enjoyed was the attention, the power, all his friends really thinking he was cool and liking him and laughing, you know, when he made jokes about other people, and it just made him feel good. And he said it was only in grade 10 that one of his teachers recognized that and channeled his energy in a more positive way, and that's all he needed. And that's what he does now, and he's channeled that very, very strong leader. He has the leadership qualities, but that were turned to bullying when he was in middle school, high school, and that can be turned into something positive. So I thought that was a very interesting experience as well. And then, who do we call a bully, and who actually has other kinds of qualities that can be used later? So. Donc je voudrais terminer en remerciant, bien sûr, comme Tara l'a dit, tous les conférenciers. C'était très enrichissant. Aussi, bien sûr, l'audience. Merci d'être aussi resté aussi longtemps. On est tous fatigués, peut-être. Et un grand merci à Lynn Bissonnette et aussi à tous les bénévoles, les étudiants bénévoles qui sont restés ici pendant la journée.